as in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the maintainer of innumerable living entities in terms of their different situations, according to individual work and reaction of work. That Supreme Personality of Godhead is also by his plenary portions alive in the heart of every living entity. Only saintly persons who can see within and without the same Supreme Lord can actually attain to perfect and eternal peace. Nityo nityanam chaitanas chaitananam eko bahunam yo viditati kaman tam atmastam yen pushyanti tiras tesham shanti shashvatini taresham. Katha Upanishad 2.2.13. The same Vedic truth given to Arjuna is given to all persons in the world who pose themselves as very learned, but factually have but a poor fund of knowledge. The Lord says clearly that he himself, Arjuna, and all the kings who are assembled on the battlefield are eternally individual beings, and that the Lord is eternally the maintainer of the individual living entities, both in their conditioned as well as in their liberated situations. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the supreme individual person, and Arjuna, that Lord's eternal associate, and all the kings assembled there are individual eternal persons. It is not that they did not exist as individuals in the past, and it is not that they will not remain eternal persons. Their individuality existed in the past, and their individuality will continue in the future without interruption. Therefore, there is no cause for lamentation for anyone. The Mayavadi theory that after liberation, the individual soul separated by the covering of Maya or illusion will merge into the impersonal Brahman and lose its individual existence is not supported herein by Lord Krishna, the Supreme Authority, nor is the theory that we only think of individuality in the conditioned state supported herein. Krishna clearly says herein that in the future also the individuality of the Lord and others, as it is confirmed in the Upanishads, will continue eternally. This statement of Krishna is authoritative because Krishna cannot be subject to illusion. If individuality is not a fact, then Krishna would not have stressed it so much, even for the future. The Mayavadi may argue that the individuality spoken of by Krishna is not spiritual, but material. Even accepting the argument that the individuality is material, then how can one distinguish Krishna's individuality? Krishna affirms his individuality in the past and confirms his individuality in the future also. He has confirmed his individuality in many ways, and impersonal Brahman has been declared to be subordinate to him. Krishna has maintained spiritual individuality all along. If he is accepted as an ordinary conditioned soul in individual consciousness, then his Bhagavad Gita has no value as authoritative scripture. A common man with all the four defects of human frailty is unable to teach that which is worth hearing. The Gita is above such literature. No mundane book compares with the Bhagavad Gita. When one accepts Krishna as an ordinary man, the Gita loses all importance. The Mayavadi argues that the plurality mentioned in this verse is conventional and that it refers to the body. But previous to this verse, such a bodily conception is already condemned. After condemning the bodily conception of the living entities, how was it possible for Krishna to place a conventional proposition on the body again? Therefore, individuality is maintained on spiritual grounds and is thus confirmed by great acharyas like Sri Ramanuja and others. It is clearly mentioned in many places in the Gita that the spiritual individuality is understood by those who are devotees of the Lord. Those who are envious of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead have no bona fide access to the great literature. The non-devotee's approach to the teachings of the Gita is something like bees licking on a bottle of honey. One cannot have a taste of honey unless one opens the bottle. Similarly, the mysticism of the Bhagavad Gita can be understood only by devotees and no one else can taste it, as it is stated in the 4th chapter of the book. What isn't? Hold on. Similarly, the mysticism of the Bhagavad Gita can be understood only by devotees, and no one else can taste it, as it is stated in the 4th chapter of the book. Nor can the Gita be touched by persons who envy the very existence of the Lord. Therefore, the Mayavadi explanation of the Gita is a most misleading presentation of the whole truth. Lord Chaitanya has forbidden us to read commentations made by the Mayavadis and warns that one who takes to such an understanding of the Mayavadi philosophy loses all power to understand the real mystery of the Gita. If individuality refers to the empirical universe, then there is no need of teaching by the Lord. The plurality of the individual soul and of the Lord is an eternal fact, and it is confirmed by the Vedas as above mentioned. So, does anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts? You want to, if you like. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare
I thought it was interesting that Prabhupada talks a lot about the impersonalists in this purport. So he starts off by saying that the covering of Maya or illusion, when the individual soul is liberated, that it's gonna merge into the supreme absolute. That was the third paragraph. And then he also talks about how Brahman has been declared to be subordinate to him. So the Brahman effulgence is not only the living entities, which are Brahman also, but the Brahman effulgence, which the Mayavadis want to merge into so desperately. That's actually a part of his feature as Bhagavan. It's one of his features. There's the Brahman effulgence, there's the super soul, and then there's himself, Bhagavan, as Supreme Personality of Godhead. So yeah, that was nice. And then I like how he was talking about how the Mayavadis are like they just basically like torch the whole understanding of the Gita, and that they have no real access to it. There's also a nice point here that said, if he is accepted as an ordinary conditioned soul in individual consciousness, then his Bhagavad Gita has no value as authoritative scripture. A common man with all the 4 defects of human frailty, which is the 4 defects are that he's live, his senses are imperfect, he's prone to illusion, he is bound to commit mistakes, and he is prone to cheating. These are the 4 defects of a regular human being. But the Vyasadeva, who made these books, who wrote these books, he has none of these defects because he's an incarnation of God. He's an incarnation of Krishna. So it's we have to, it's authoritative, and we have to this is one of the things that the Mayavadis, they don't really believe in, is that we should take authority we should take the verdict of an authority in the Vedas. The Mayavadis, they like to see like empirical like experiments or hypotheses. But it's said in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that someone who reads Vedic literature and gives some hypothesis, he spoils the whole thing, because the Vedas themselves, they're self-evident, which means they are if you put them in if you put the directions that they give into practice, then if you do that, then then you can see that it works. Like, what's one? Do you know one? Do you know an injunction that the Vedas talk about? Cleanliness. So they say, so cleanliness is next to godliness. So the Vedas say that you should bathe 3 times a day, once in the morning after you get up, once after you use the bathroom, and then once at night. And if you do this, then your consciousness becomes cleaner. And we, us as brahmacharis and anyone in the ISKCON movement who's strictly following, they take bath 3 times a day at least. And they can tell you from their personal experience that their consciousness is so much cleaner than when before they started Krishna consciousness. They're very it's easier to think. It feels better. It's a more uplifting experience for the consciousness. So I was talking about this because I was saying how the Vedas are self-evident. So if someone gives a hypothesis or like an imagination, or imagines some interpretation on the scriptures, then he's not able to understand it. This is what Lord Chaitanya was speaking about when he was talking to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya with about the his interpretation on the Vedas. Lord Chaitanya said, I know the direct meaning of the Vedas, but I don't know what you're speaking about. It's like, what you're speaking about, it doesn't even seem like it's. He literally says, it seems like you're trying to cover the real meaning of the Vedas. So that's the impersonalist. That's their position, actually, is to cover the Lord. But the Lord himself said, it's actually said if you don't believe in Krishna, then you should believe in the Upanishads. And in the Taittiriya Upanishad, it said that everything is born out of the Supreme Brahman. And then in, what is it? In the Brahma Sutra, the Vedanta Sutra, the second aphorism is Janma Dyasya Yataha. So the absolute truth is that from which everything emanates. But the thing about it is, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, 8th verse, it tells Krishna says himself that all spiritual I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who know this perfectly engage in my devotional service with determination and worship me with all their hearts. So you won't find that anywhere else where somebody says that they're the source of everything. You can't find it in the Bible. You can't find it in the Quran. You can't find it in the Torah. You can't find it in any of these scriptures that somebody actually says that they're God. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself says that he is God, and that he says it in so many. He says it in so many different verses, like Mamaivam Sho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Shasta Indriyani Prakriti Stani Karshati. He says that the living entities are my fragmental parts and parcels, and that they're struggling with the material nature. Anyway, I don't know why. Well, yeah, I was talking about how Krishna says that he's God. So, yeah, this is exactly what the Mayavadis do. They just try to cover up the whole philosophy of the truth. And it's said that it's said in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that it's said that one shouldn't read the Sharirika Bhashya because it's full of, I can't remember, but like Shankaracharya, he's saying that that I can't remember, but yeah. So this Mayavadi is like these Mayavadi theories are just a bunch of nonsense. That's all that it is. All right.
Text 13. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. Purport. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of the body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering, according to one's work in life. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have either spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment of material existence. So in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the supersoul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called Dhira, or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the Supreme cleavable or changeable against the principle of the Supreme Soul being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the Supreme exist eternally, sanatana, and are called kshara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual soul remains the same, fragmental. But once liberated, he lives in eternal life and bliss and knowledge with the personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the supersoul who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma, who is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the 4th chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then their relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by the illusory energy Maya, then there is no need of one being the instructor and the other the instructed. Such instruction would be useless because in the clutches of Maya, no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity, Arjuna, who is a forgotten soul deluded by Maya. So, anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments? Sure, it's a question.
I was just wondering what this theory of reflection means. That's a basic question.
The theory of reflection can be applied to the supersoul who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma, who is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun. We're going to take. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the moon. Wait. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead. Not quite sure what he's referring to as the theory of reflection. I mean, we can take all the points that he presented to understand the essence of what he's saying in context of the specific 2 verses we've been hearing. So that the spirit soul is a fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord. And he says the theory of reflection can be applied to the super soul who is present in each and every individual body. So that we are, put it this way, some people say that we're all one and we're just the universe or God creating, like manifesting into a specific form to enjoy itself in other ways, to expand itself in other ways. But once we leave this body, we go back to the oneness, so that everything is actually one, and it's all just a Leela of God manifesting in unlimited incarnations to expand itself in unlimited variety of ways. But the point here being made in the Bhagavad Gita and stressed by Srila Prabhupada is that the soul is always fragmental. And Prabhupada gives the example of this reflection in water of the sky, so that you can see the sky's reflection in the water, and within the water you see the stars and the moon and the sun. And he says the stars are compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental souls represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Souls, the personality of God, are Sri Krishna. They're not on the same level. So whether the reflection, whether we look up in the sky, the sun is not on the same level as the stars. Whether we look in the reflection, the sun is not on the same level of the stars. So the point is being made that whether we're here in the conditioned state or in the liberated state, we always remain eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord, where we are small and He is absolute. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
Permission to make a quick comment?
Yeah.
It's a quick one.
You can make a whole class comment.
So I was just looking at some notes today and I heard, or I was reading in these notes, maybe, I don't know where I wrote it, somewhere in class from one of you guys. The super soul is referred to as the divided in the undivided within the divided. I just like the way that that was put, and it's right in line with what you're saying and this theory of reflection that you're kind of expanding on. The undivided in the divided.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a nice point. And one who comes to the spiritual platform, he's observant of this fact at all times. That, like, for instance, I could be super engaged on book distribution or preaching or whatever the field of activities is. And I am interacting with that same Supreme Lord who's situated within all the hearts of all living entities. So if I interact with you, him, her, everybody, it's the same interaction with the same Supreme Lord who's witnessing it all, but all the living entities are also unique and individual within that. So we have to be able to see both. In a practical example, which kind of expanding upon the idea, just for some more broad-mindedness, is I remember personally when I read Prabhupada's books and started trying to turn to God and seeing God, Krishna, in all fields of activities. And I neglected the actions of the living entities. Because say somebody did a gift for me or did some good favor for me, then I'd be, oh, thank God, God really looked out for me. God blessed me. God gave me this. And I even would say that in front of the personality. And then they'd be offended because they might not even believe in God. And they're just like, I just went out of my way to do this favor for you. And you're not even like thanking me or acknowledging me. You're just praising God. So I say that in the context that, yes, we should see that God, Krishna, is the supreme director and he's the one who's controlling everything, but also the living entities are there and they have their free will and it's tied together. So it's not that we should separate one from the other. But ultimately, we see in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes the 5 factors of action, and the ultimate factor is the supreme director, the super soul. So a devotee has this knowledge and knows this, but at the same time, he can still appreciate the living entities for playing their parts by being an instrument of the Lord's mercy. So, just an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like, namely Prabhupada isn't really attached. I mean, he's not attached to anything, it seems like. The pure devotee obviously wants everyone to take up Krishna consciousness and wants everyone to go back home to Godhead. But I'm thinking about Prabhupada in that instance where that one gentleman was protesting his lecture saying, well, I want to come back as a dog, And Prabhupada said, you have my blessing. He didn't, like that is just completely renounced and just outside of any. I mean, he's not trying to hold on to the results of his actions, namely his preaching. He's just totally removed from those results. So I'm trying to understand that, because, he's so compassionate and he wants so much for us to advance and to go back home. But he's also like, because like me, when I preach, I'm very attached. This person has to believe me. They have to, believe that Krishna's God right now. And this is like just horrible for the preaching because they feel that even if it's not coming across directly, they can understand that, okay, this guy's he's crossing my boundaries, and it's not. So when we're preaching, how can we be more renounced?
How can we be more what?
Renounced from.
Oh, more detached. Well, if I open up a shop and I want to make a lot of money, right? You can open up a corner store and you might have many, many customers. Keep in mind the goal is to make money. That's why you have a business. You have many, many customers. But across the street, there's a fine diamond shop. They don't have so many customers, but just one customer comes in and they spend enough money that, 1,000 customers spent across the street. So they're detached, they're renounced. They're not trying to get every single person in there. They know they have something valuable to offer and they let the product speak for itself. So what does that mean? Let the product speak for itself. There was a great preacher. He came here and visited a few years ago. And he was making the point that, said a few things in relation to this, but he made the point that Hare Krishna. He's saying that we shouldn't depend on any external factor to support our conviction about what we're doing. Meaning that we should be so convinced with what we're doing from our own personal practice that should spill over of wanting to share that with others. So we can extract from that notion that in a neophyte stage, we want to convince others because really we're trying to convince ourselves. So we're offended if somebody doesn't take to it because then we don't have the conviction ourselves. So then we're thinking, man, everybody has to do this because I'm doing it. So if I'm doing it, then I want to make sure everybody else is doing it because that supports what we're doing. So then we feel safer about what we're doing. But if we have that internal conviction, it's like, imagine we're on a shipwreck and you're on a safety boat that's going to pick up people who are drowning in the water. And it's the middle of the ocean. There's no hope for them. So you're going and you have this safe platform and you're yelling at the people, hey, grab a hold of this raft. Here's a life preserver. And they're like, no. Or maybe they want to, but they're too belligerent, and you see that they will actually disturb the ship and make it more troublesome for others. So in that way you have to execute detachment. So you have something good to offer and you're willing to give it to whoever takes to it. But whoever's not going to take it in the proper means, then you can't really give it anyway. So all you can do is stick your hand down, and according to how they reciprocate, then that's what you can do for them. So we go out and we preach, and if we meet somebody who's sweet and inquisitive and wants to do service or has some kind of inclination towards the process at all or anything that could be connected to Krishna consciousness, then our job as a preacher is to fan that spark simply. If we go bashing people, you're eating meat, you're a demon, you have to give it up. It's still falling in that line of like, we're not really so convinced about what we're doing because we're unstable, then that spills off into others as like a prejudice and like pushing. So the expert preacher is just fanning that spark. And this is coming from a principle of Rupa Goswami. I believe it's in the Nectar of Devotion, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He describes that in the beginning, somehow or some way, the acharya should engage somebody in Krishna's service in a way that's I'm putting in my own words, but exciting or tasteful for them. Later, you install all the rules and regulations and all the strictures. You don't start with, hey, you guys on the street, give up the 4 regulative principles. You're sinners. Nobody will do that. And we have practical experience. We see people who preach like that, and it rubs most people the wrong way. But rather to give something tasteful so people get a higher taste. And as they get something tasteful, then you're able to install more and give more. And then they take to it more serious. And then as one does that and they take it seriously, they'll realize that it's all part of a process and it's important and it's all prescribed by people who know the disease condition and how to be free from it. So for us, who's not on that higher level, all we can really do is just be an instrument of Krishna's and Prabhupada's and just stick our hand out and offer that. And if they ask, why should I take to this? We can be honest with how it's changed our life, how it's helped so many other people's lives, how it's transformed people's consciousness and gives an outlook and perspective of peace and clarity, even though we might not have it all the way now, but at least we can look in retrospect from where we were and where we are now. So we can preach from where we're at and that way be fully honest and transparent. Rather, that's there, but also Srila Prabhupada did appreciate if, like, there was Shama Sundar's daughter, somebody was asking, who's Krishna? And she said, Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. And he was like, yes, that's expert preaching. So preach according to your own realization and preach according to what we've heard from authorities. But if we're trying to preach in a way that's oppressive from what we've heard from authorities, but we don't have the realization, then somebody can easily question us. And then all of a sudden things can unravel. And from my experience, from my observation, that's coming more from this place of like, I want to say pride, but not so much pride, but uncertainty and doubt. We can act so convinced and this is it, and kind of push that upon people. And it can be coming from a place of uncertainty because I want them to take to it, because if I see them take to it, then I'm convinced that what I'm doing is good. And this way we're trying to justify our behavior from this activity. And this way we're attached to the fruits. And when we're attached to the fruits, then it creates difficulty and turmoil rather than just trying to act as an instrument of the Supreme Lord. So like this Prabhu mentioned, our inner conviction should not be determined by the fruits of our activities, mainly he was talking about our interactions with people in Sankirtan, that we should get that from our own study, from our own sadhana, from our own sangha, and then that should spill out to others. But preaching in general, it's safer to preach according to what we've heard. And if somebody questions us, we could say, look, this is what it said in the Vedas. Not that I have to say, okay, here's what it said in the Vedas, and I'm saying, I believe this is what it is, this is how, if we don't have that realization, we could say, well, I'm studying these books, I'm following this path, this is what it said, this is what it teaches. Why should you follow that? Oh, because it has these other teachings, and they say if you follow this, and I have followed that, and it helped me so much. So then there's got to be some merit to these other points. Not that, I go into a science conference hall and I start telling them the earth does not revolve around the sun. And they're going to be like, oh, yeah, can you prove that? And I'm like, the Vedas said it. It has to be true. But I have no realization, no knowledge to back that up. Then I'll put myself in a pickle where I can be easily dismantled. And that could even hurt my faith more because I'm putting myself out there beyond my adhikari, beyond my realization, beyond my qualification. So I hope it's helpful. Oh, thank you everybody for participating. Shrimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Shri Gauranitai Ki Jai, Ancha Kapaturu Vyascha Kripa Sindhi Vachapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.